welcome to Turning Back the Pages, the podcast where children's book authors discuss their favorite childhood books. I'm your host, Allie. Today, author Tami Lehman-Wilzig is joining me to discuss her favorite childhood book, Madeline. Tami Lehman-Wilzig is an award-winning of 13 published Jewish content picture books, and 3 more on the way this year. Her titles include the award-winning books, SOOSIE, The Horse That Saved Shabbat, Keeping the Promise, Nathan Blows Out the Hanukkah Candles, Passover Around the World, and Green Bible Stories for Children. She's also the creator of a unique digital story lesson plan series entitled Shabbat Around the World. PJ Library has selected 5 of her books for its English-speaking market and has translated 3 of her books into Spanish and 1 of her books into Russian for those language markets. Living in Israel for over 45 years, Tami served as one of the country's leading English-language advertising copywriters for 35 years, creating the marketing image of numerous Israeli exporters. Tami lives in Kfar Saba with her husband, a busy Savta grandmother. She spends her time writing stories, creating glass and ceramic art, and going on photography shoots. Welcome, Tami.
Shalom, Ali, and thank you for having me.
I am delighted to have you here today. So you chose for our discussion to talk about Madeline. Please tell me why you chose this particular book.
Well, it's just the standout book of my growing up. I grew up in Manhattan, and I honestly don't remember many other picture books. I know we had a lot of golden books then. I'm a dinosaur, so the amount of children's books that are out today, is just astronomical compared to what I had. And Madeline, as we continue in our conversation, I'll just explain. It just, I don't know. I loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it.
Yeah, well, Madeline was one of my favorite books growing up, and I read it to my girls often, and it's made it into our family lingo. Like every time we go to the zoo, like the children say, poo poo to the tiger at the zoo. All right, well, we are going to go ahead and get started with our 30-second recap. So I'm going to put 30 seconds on the clock, and you will have that time to tell us about the story of Madeline. I will go after you. Just for anyone who maybe is not familiar with the story, though I can't imagine that many people are not familiar with this story if they like children's books. We have 30 seconds on the clock, and go.
Madeline is the youngest of 12 little girls living in a boarding school in Paris where everything is neat and orderly. It's run by a lady named Miss Clavel, who wakes up one night feeling that something is not right. Sure enough, she goes to the little girl's bedroom, the long bedroom, and Madeline is in tears because she's in pain. The doctor is called, who calls an ambulance, and off Madeline goes to the hospital to get her appendix out. 10 days later, the little girls come to visit and discover all the toys and candy that Madeline's papa has sent her. That night, Miss Clavel once again feels something is not right. And she goes into the room, and sure enough, they're all lined up crying. They want their appendixes out too.
Perfect, right on time. Seriously, that was really well done. All right, it is my turn in 3, 2, 1. All right, this is a story about 12 little girls who live in Paris. They do everything in 2 straight lines. The smallest one is Madeline, and she is very brave. She says things like poo poo to the tiger in the zoo. But one night, their caretaker, Miss Clavel, wakes up in the middle of the night and feels like something is wrong. And in fact, Madeline has appendicitis. She's taken to the hospital, has a surgery. All the girls visit her and play with her toys and are super jealous. And then once they go home, Miss Clavel wakes up again in the middle of the night to find that all the girls also want to go have surgery in the hospital. All right, I was a little over time there. All right, well, do you know much about the author of the Madeline series, Ludwig Bemelmans?
So, you prompted me to do homework. And I looked it up because when I was growing up, it was only the one Madeline book. And
Yes.
it was written by a man named Ludwig Bemelmans, but it eventually turned into a series. He started it as a series, I think, in the 1940s and 50s. Maybe he wrote three, but I found out that his grandson, John Bemelmans Marciano, took over.
Yes.
And that as of 1998, the series had sold over 15 million copies worldwide. And all I could think of was Halavai, which is Hebrew for if only that would happen to my books.
Yeah, I think it was really fascinating because I remember from my childhood, and I was born in 1988. The last one was published posthumously from Belemans. I remember reading that one in my childhood. I've read them all now, and now there are even more. I mean, we have one now that Madeline visits the White House. Um, I'm not actually sure if that's like a real authentic one, but I don't know, we have it. But yes, Ludwig Bemelmans was born in Austria in 1898. His parents owned a hotel business, though his father left when he was around 6. It seems quite scandalous. Both Bemelman's mother and governess were pregnant by Bemelman's father, and he left for yet another woman. As a teen, Ludwig apprenticed at a hotel under his uncle's supervision, but he was frequently whipped and beaten by the head waiter of the hotel. Having had enough, he warned the head waiter that if he was whipped again, he would retaliate with a gun, which he did, wounding the waiter badly. When the police showed up at his door, they gave him an option. You can go to a German reform school, or you can go to America. So he chose to go to America. Of course, this is just Bumblebee's version of the story. There are other versions of this where his uncle just simply gives him the option and no police are involved. While in America, he joined the army during World War I, but he was not sent to Europe because of his maternal German roots. He became a full-time cartoonist in 1926. While on vacation on the coast of France, he was riding his bicycle home one night while holding lobsters under his arms. He was hit by the only car on the island, which was the baker's van. So he breaks his arms. He has to go to the hospital to have it set, and he's there for 2 weeks. While there, he sees a little girl in the room over who had her appendix out. She stands up to show him her scar. Does this sound familiar? He then writes a story we know as Madeline. It was first rejected by the publisher Viking and then accepted and published by Simon & Schuster. He did not write the sequel, Madeline's Rescue, until 1953. He died at the age of 64 and is buried in Arlington National Cemetery.
Wow,
So,
fascinating.
yeah, I thought his life was very fascinating. So tell me about your first memories of this book.
So, I don't have crystal clear memories of reading Madeline. She was sort of like a companion story for me, and I'll explain. Not companion in the way you're thinking of it. My father was from Vienna, and he was an educator, and he was a storyteller, and he was also a Francophile. And his job when he came home from work was to put me to sleep, at night. And every night when he would tuck me in, he would make up a new episode of a series that he created, which was called The Adventures of Pierre and Paul. And of course, it took place in Paris. And so I learned all about French life through Pierre and Paul. But they were boys, and I have a feeling that he must have been when Madeline came out. I'm sure it was my father who bought the book, because then it gave me a feeling of, well, the girl's also in a French story. That's sort of, like why I say she was my companion piece, because she was a companion to Pierre and Paul.
Oh, that's nice. That's a good memory. Did your dad do this every night? Did he make up any other stories?
No, he made them up. I can actually see me lying in bed, and he's sitting there like on the bed, and saying, so what shall Pierre and Paul do tonight?
Have you reread Madeline anytime recently?
As a matter of fact, I brought it up to my book club. I belong to a really serious book club. Like we are 14 ladies of my advanced age, and we read a book every single month. We all read the same book. And on a rotating basis, somebody presents the book and does the research like you just did, all that marvelous research. And Bemelman does the research into the author and also analyzes the story. And then we all join the discussion. So 2 years ago, and they all know I'm a children's book author. We've been together for God knows how long. And 2 years ago, when it was my turn to present a month beforehand, I said to them, hey, let's do something different. Let's all bring in, this is like your podcast. I said, let's all bring in our favorite children's book, and then explain why it was your favorite children's book. And I brought in Madeline, of course, and I was shocked. There are women here in this, because this is Israel. They're not just only Americans. We've got Brits and we've got some Scotland and we have from France and Holland, and they all seem to know Madeline, but especially those from the English-speaking world. When I presented Madeline, I felt it was sort of like this chorus, everybody saying, in an old house in Paris that was covered in vines, lived 12 little girls, like in two straight lines. And they just loved it. So,
Oh,
yeah.
oh, good. Yeah, I could still probably quote most of it. As a child, what stood out to you and why do you think it stood out to you?
Well, I think that there are a few things, like what attracted me to Madeline. Number one was that not so much Madeline herself, everything was tip-top orderly.
Mhm.
I was, as a little girl, anything but. I was what, I was what they would call in the Hebrew a balaganist. Everything was just one big mess. And when my mother was always chiding me and saying to me, "Go tidy up your room," I would take everything and sweep it under my bed, then pull down the bedspread, and I would come out 5 minutes later and go, "Ta-da!" And then she would make a beeline for the bedspread and lift it up and say, "Clean it up." So Madeline, they brushed their teeth in an orderly fashion. They walked in an orderly fashion. Everything was just spick and span. So that, I think, was sort of for me a relief.
Yeah.
To see, or something that I didn't identify with. It was like a wannabe. I don't know. I think that's because my father spoke so much about Pierre and Paul. They were always doing something else in Paris. So there are in Madeline the color illustrations. Most of them are like yellow background with ink. But the color ones are pictures of different places in Paris with the Eiffel Tower.
Mhm.
And so I sort of felt I knew these places, or I could imagine them now that when the next episode of Pierre and Paul would take place. So those were the things that really attracted me to the book.
Oh, yeah, I don't think I mentioned it, but Bemelmans was also the illustrator of the Madeline books. He's actually a really creative illustrator. Yeah, he was just really creative. When he first moved to America as a teenager, like right before he moved, I was just looking at this artwork earlier, before we started talking. He drew what he thought America would look like, and he drew trains going up over the skyscrapers, the tall buildings. He was just a really creative and honestly funny guy. There was at a children's museum exhibit in New York City a few years ago. It exhibited a bunch of different artwork from beloved storybooks, and someone it's on YouTube. I really wish I could have gone. It sounds really amazing. But someone, while the exhibit was still live, was telling his life story, and I'll include it in the show notes just because I think it's really interesting. But it included a lot of the stories of his life and a lot of his artwork, besides just what's in Madeline. I think it is really worth checking out. All right, what is your favorite part of Madeline, and who is your favorite character?
So first of all, the part that I identified with the most was the hospital scene. And I was as a little girl, I was pretty sickly. And when I was 4 years old, I came down with pneumonia. And back then, pneumonia was no little trifle. Like it was a serious business. The antibiotics that people take today and, go home, they just didn't exist. And I was hospitalized, and I was in an oxygen tent for a week. It was pretty traumatic for a 4-year-old. Like I remember it was this plastic covering all over the bed, and there were zippers where the nurse could open it up and stick in her arm and give me the injection of the medicine. And then a week later, I was put into the recuperation ward with all the other kids, and the parents would come and all the toys and all the candies, So, I said to myself, like that, there's a few reasons, as you can see, why Madeline was, for me, such an attractive book.
For sure.
So I love those scenes. I will have a criticism about it afterwards
Oh, yeah.
in the hospital, but my favorite character, well, there really aren't very many main characters. The girls are nameless. There's Miss Clavel. And of course, I like the fact that there was a Jewish doctor, Dr. Cohn. But it's Madeline, of course. And you asked me, so who would play Madeline today?
Yes.
I have to confess total ignorance. I don't know who the child actors are in the States today. And when I was growing up, the child actors that we watched weren't even from our generation. They were way back, So all I could see was Shirley Temple with her banana curls and dimples playing Madeline.
I'll take that as an answer. To be truthful, I don't know that many names of child actors these days. So Shirley Temple is as good as any to me. There was a Disney movie, Madeline, when I was a child. I can't remember what year. I don't even know who played Madeline, but she did a good job. And I always said my cousins, I had two redheaded cousins, and they dressed up as Madeline several little years for Halloween. I always thought they were the cutest. So honestly, my answer would just be make my cousins little kids again and let one of them play Madeline. My next question, would you change anything about this book?
Yeah, so then comes my criticism about the hospital scene, and it's Papa. Papa is a non-existent parent, and your
Mm-hmm.
child is in the hospital, and you
Mm-hmm.
send presents and candy, and you don't come. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's sort of like he comes across as a dysfunctional father. You
Right.
know, Mama, of course, doesn't exist at all. So like I was thinking about that when I was looking at your questions. I was saying to myself, so how come I didn't think about that back then when I was a little girl? And I guess it was because it took place in a foreign country and it seemed like a fantasy all around. So I just accepted it because something like that never would have happened in my world. Um, so that's my criticism. I mean, I think that, like it's sort of, there's a coldness that I feel sorry for the little girls. I don't
Mm-hmm.
feel the love and warmth. They're not orphans. You get that
Mm-hmm.
feeling. They're not, they've been sent away, like at a very, very young age.
Oh, yeah. Like, as a child, I definitely thought they were orphans. I was an adult before I realized, like, oh, wait, it's Papa that's it. Yeah, it just didn't click because it just seemed so obvious. Like, of course, if he would be there, dad would be there if his child was sick.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Were you an avid reader as a child?
It depends on the age. As a little girl, I was an avid listener. Like my
Mm-hmm.
parents would tell stories. My father would make up stories.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, my mother was a frustrated actress who liked reading dramatic stories, like dramatic renditions. When I started to learn how to read, I think I was a reluctant reader
Mm-hmm.
until my mother got me hooked on Nancy Drew and Trixie Belden and all the
Mm-hmm.
mysteries. And then when I was 10 years old, we were away at a bungalow colony in the summer and it was a thunderstorm. And I used that opportunity to write my first quote unquote book,
Uh-huh.
The Case of the Green Eyes, which was about a cat. And I stapled it for a binding, So I
I
have
love
to
that.
say, the house was covered in books, covered
Yes.
in books. But it was my father would go to an antiquarian shop every Friday on his way home And I always remember as a child, my mother pointing out a corner in a specific room, and she would say, "You see that? No books there." By the time my parents moved from their apartment, and it was one of these Upper West Side apartments with 9 rooms, every room except for the bathroom had books.
It sounds familiar. Sounds familiar. Well, let's talk about your books. You have three books coming out this year. So why don't you give me a recap of all three of them, and then we can talk about the one that's coming out in April.
Okay. So the one coming out in April, just a brief one, is called On the Wings of Eagles. And this is a historical fiction book, which is based on real events. And it tells the story of Hala, who was a young Yemenite Jewish girl who, with her family, was airlifted to Israel by Alaska Airlines during Operation Magic Carpet. That's what they called it. And it was a daring mission that Alaska Airlines rescued almost 50,000 Yemenite Jews between 1949 and 1950 and brought them to safety in Israel. So it's an exciting story. Then I have another book also dealing with Yemenite culture, and it's called The Henna Helper. In Israel, we call it china, but it's the henna plant, that if you're familiar with it. And in this book, the star is a little girl called Gali, and she couldn't be happier because her cousin Yael is getting married, and Yael is adding something. It takes place in Tel Aviv, in Israel, and Yael has added something new to an Israeli wedding. It's relatively new, I would say, over the past 5 to 10 years, and that's having a flower girl.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's a relatively new addition to Israeli weddings. So, she can't wait to have her flower girl dress made by her grandmother, by her Savta, who's the best seamstress in the neighborhood. But her Savta is also organizing the henna party, which is a ceremony that's held, a special pre-wedding ceremony that's held a week before the wedding. And it entails a lot of beautiful costumes and headwear and gorgeous jewelry. The Yemenites are known for their handicrafts, and they're known for their filigree silver pieces and their embroidery. It's just magnificent. It's very, 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 very colorful. And of course, Gali's poo-pooing this. She doesn't want to be involved. So her grandmother gets her involved by asking her whether she would be her assistant. And by the end of the book, Gali realizes that you can combine tradition with modernity and enjoy both.
Oh, that sounds like a really fun book.
Yeah, it's very sweet. I mean, I'm a little biased, but. And my third book is called Rembrandt's Blessing. It's also historical fiction. And it's inspired by the true friendship that Rembrandt had with Rabbi Menashe ben Israel. Before I get into the story itself, just a little bit of the backstory. Rembrandt moved from Leiden to Amsterdam, and he bought a house in Amsterdam. He thought he was buying it in the artist quarter, but by mistake, he bought a house in the Jewish quarter. And these were all Jews who were descendants of Spanish Jews that had to flee the Spanish Inquisition. So they didn't exactly look Dutch. And he didn't exactly look Spanish Jewish, right? So, but also Rembrandt loved painting Bible stories. He was a big fan of the Bible. He, in his lifetime, made over 300 etchings and paintings and sketches of Bible scenes. So the story revolves around the friendship that he forms with a rabbi who helps him understand the biblical text, like the real translation of things. And he also invites, they become very, very close. They're both printers, and they do a project together. This actually is true. They did a project together. And the rabbi invites him over to his house for Friday night dinner. And there, Rembrandt sees one of I consider one of our most beautiful customs on Friday night, where fathers or parents cup their hands on top of their children's heads and say a blessing. And in the story, this inspires him to paint one of his most famous paintings, which is Jacob blessing Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Menashe.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So I'm very excited about all three.
Sounds like you've been doing a lot of work. All right, let's talk about your next book, On the Wings of Eagles.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And that book is coming out in April, which is when this podcast will air. Tell me why you chose that story.
I chose it. Years ago, I read about Alaska Airlines, and I was just so taken, like that. Wow, Alaska Airlines was the airline. You ask anybody, they'll say El Al, of course. And it wasn't. And I kept on thinking to myself, I've got to write this story because it's such a beautiful illustration of the strong bond between America and Israel.
Mhm.
So that's really, really what prompted me to do it. And it was also just a mixture of two different, very, very different cultures, having to get to know each other and understand each other. It just, I don't know, it grabbed my attention. It really just grabbed my attention. And I said it had to be told.
Well, I love that you're telling those stories. We have a little bit of time, so why don't you tell me about why you chose the stories for the other two books as well?
Well, the henna helper was actually the publisher that is doing on the Wings of Eagles. She said to me, the chief editor, she said, we don't really know very much about Yemenite Jews. Is there anything else that you could write about? Because I'd be interested in doing another book about them. And I've been to several henna or hina, celebrations, and I know that the Yemenite one is the best. All the Jews from the different Middle East countries have henna celebrations. Regular Indians in India, not Jews, they have a week-long henna celebration,
Uh-huh.
But in Israel, the Yemenite one is just the most, it's really colorful and just gorgeous. I mean, the change of clothing, and there's a lot of also dancing, specific dancing and
Mhm.
blessing. So I said, okay, I'll do that. Rembrandt, around 20 years ago, my husband and I were in Amsterdam and we went to Rembrandt's house. And I saw there was one room that was really devoted to sketches of his Jewish models.
Mhm.
And by the way, in the book, it also shows how the rabbi, he encourages the neighbors to pose for Rembrandt. The kids in the book, the kids go there and play dress up, like they have a lot of fun in his house. But anyhow, they were his real models. And I was just fascinated by it. That was when I first learned that he had formed this very close bond with the Jewish community. Then came back home and I read a book called Rembrandt and the Jews, which elaborated on it even more. And I just felt it was almost like the Alaska Airlines. It was a story that I just had to tell.
Yeah, that's really cool. Who do you hope reads these stories?
Beyond the Jewish community, beyond the Jewish
Mhm.
community. First of all, I really hope that Alaskan children living in Alaska, get to read this and read about the bravery of their fellow Alaskans, because it was not a picnic. I can guarantee you it was not a picnic airlifting them. It was pretty dangerous. I think that I don't know. I would like to get a much broader audience for my books and
Yeah.
get the Jewish borders, because I would like to share for all three of them. I would like to share stories about Israel, get these stories out. I would like to share, the diversity of the Jewish people, which it can be seen in Israel so blatantly, we're a real mosaic. And
Yes.
uh, and I just would like to get it out and have as many people read it as possible.
Oh, well, that's cool. I hope that that happens for you. Well, will you share where people can find you, where they can follow you, and anything else that you want people to know about?
Sure. Well, I am on Facebook, Tami Lehman-Wilzig, and I also have an author page called Tami Lehman-Wilzig Children's Books. I'm on LinkedIn, also Tami Lehman-Wilzig. I'm on Instagram at Tami, capital T, and then lowercase AMI, which just I'll make you laugh. In Israel, that at sound sign is called a strudel. A strudel
Oh.
is a because it looks like the strudel cake. So,
I like that. That's funny.
and then there's my website, www.tlwkidsbooks.com, where people can contact me through there and take a book tour of all my books, get to know more about me.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you for joining me today. I will have all of the information where you can follow Tommy and find all of the books that are coming out this year. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Turning Back the Pages. If you have any author suggestions, you can email me at whatallywrites@gmail.com. You can follow the show on Instagram at whatallywrites. Ally is ALLY. You can also check out Turning Back the Pages featured books on bookshop.org. And don't forget to subscribe.